legalizefreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Listen without limits. Unchain your brain. Change your thinking. Change your life. legalizefreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to legalizefreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Gary Lachman, who joins us to discuss his book, Dreaming Ahead of Time, Experiences with Precognitive Dreams, Synchronicity and Coincidence. Can we see the future in our dreams? Does time flow in one direction? What might our dreams be trying to tell us? What is the nature of synchronicity or meaningful coincidence? Is there really any difference between the dream world and so-called reality? Renowned esoteric writer Gary Lachman has been recording his own precognitive dreams for 40 years. In this unique and intriguing book, he recounts the discovery that he dreams ahead of time and argues convincingly that this extraordinary ability is, in fact, shared by all of us. Dreaming Ahead of Time is a personal exploration of precognition, synchronicity and coincidence, drawing on the work of thinkers including J.W. Dunne, J.B. Priestley and Carl Jung. Lachman's description and analysis of his own experience introduces readers to the uncanny power of our dreaming minds and reveals the illusion of our arbitrary distinctions between past, present and future. Hello and welcome, Gary, and thank you so much for joining us once again on legalizefreedom.com.
It's a pleasure to be on once again.
Gary, today we're going to be talking about your latest book's just come out, and that's entitled Dreaming Ahead of Time, Experiences with Precognitive Dreams, Synchronicity and Coincidence. As per usual, just before we dive into that, for listeners who don't know, just say a quick word about your background and your work in general.
Well, I've written quite a few books having to deal with, I guess, what's known as the Western inner tradition or Western esoteric tradition, and also its influence on culture and related topics such as consciousness and things of that sort. This particular book is one about my own experiences. I usually sort of write biographies of main figures in this field or kind of surveys of aspects of it. But this is more personal work of mine, where I'm talking at quite a bit about a series of dreams I had over quite a few years now, actually decades, in which bits and pieces of the future turn up.
Now, throughout the book, you mentioned its personal nature. You do, of course, reference many writers and thinkers and researchers whose work you have commented on and written about over the years when relevant to the topic at hand. So we'll start talking about your dream journal. Basically, you've been keeping all these years in just a moment. A memory or thought that I like to share when talking about dreams is my experience as a child with having, I've had very interesting dreams all my life. I think most people's dreams are interesting with a capital I, to say the least. But I do remember any time that I awoke having had anything disturbing in my dreams or anything that I didn't like or anything that was bad, however I judged that to be, the adults would say, it's just a dream or it's not real. And I never really understood that, because I thought, well, certainly when you're in the dream space, that experience is at least as real as anything else from, waking reality. And then many years later, I had a very disturbing dream. The only really dream I've ever had, I've had certainly what people would call nightmares, but this particular dream took place in the late 90s, early 2000s. I don't quite recall now. And in the dream, I was basically turning into a werewolf. And it was such a terrifying experience. You know, I could feel, you just think American Werewolf in London, you know, that transmogrification. And it was so terrifying, it woke me up. This is not uncommon with bad dreams. And it was still dark, although it was probably approaching dawn. But it's the only time that I was so disturbed by a dream, I had to open the curtains, let the light in, and sit up in bed and be awake for a while. And obviously this faded, the feeling faded quite quickly.
Was there a full moon at the time?
I have no idea. I didn't have the presence.
You go back and look, well, you could check possibly. But no, I just curious.
I didn't have the presence of mind to look at that. However, I mentioned that particular dream stroke nightmare because that reminded me when that happened, I thought, and the adult said that, you know, it's just a dream. It's not real. Well, you know, that's one of the most full on, you know, experiences I've had in my entire life. And it took place, you know, when I was in the dream space. So, but we can get started.
I mean, reality has, you know, comes in different shapes and sizes. And, one of the people that I do talk about in the book, J.B. Priestley, who's not read as much as he used to be or should, but he was very well known, very popular in the 20th century. He said, I mean, dreams are very important to him, and he was what he called the time-haunted man. He was haunted by the mystery of time and also the mystery of dreams. But he says, I'm paraphrasing him, but he says that, you know, the most significant, important, tremendous experience I've ever had came in a dream, and I have less evidence for it than I do for having had a cold or you know, a broken fingernail or something.
Well, actually,
you know, we all know the reason why people say it's only a dream, it's not real, is that it's not something that takes place in our usual sensory, external, physical kind of world. It takes place inside our heads, metaphorically, and we tend to consider that only subjective or only psychological and that kind of thing. But as I say in the book, I mean, and you just said, and others, and have said the same thing, is that you can often experience a greater reality, in the sense of like the reality being even more. You know, we talk about HD and you know, VR and all that, but some dreams have this kind of crackle, this kind of crystal clear, vibrant, pristine kind of reality, unlike, you know, anything we ever experience really in everyday life.
Well, actually, funny you should mention that Priestley quote, because I made a note of that because it resonated with me, because I wholeheartedly agreed. Now, that werewolf nightmare aside, I would definitely agree with Priestley about some of the most meaningful and experiences taking place in the dream space. In fact, from your book, he remarked that, quote, the most meaningful and the most ecstatic moment, end quote, he had ever known occurred in a dream, and yet, quote, I have for it less visible evidence than I have for a slight cold in the head or a broken fingernail, end quote. Yeah. And I thought, I understood that, you know, it really made a lot of sense to me indeed.
I mean, and in one way, if you think about that, that would be true of almost all of our deep, meaningful experiences. You listen to a piece of music, and you know it moves you in this tremendous way, but it takes place inwardly. It takes place inside, and you know we can't quantify that. We can't register that on any sort of measurable device. And if let's hope we never can. My God, there may be a future when we can. I hope that isn't the case. But you know what I mean? These are the sorts of things that are tremendously powerful and meaningful, but they're not, they're as of nothing almost in terms of any kind of sensory experience or quantifiable, measurable fact.
Well, I think this is where scientific materialism of the hardcore fundamentalist variety goes wrong, and where transhumanists go wrong really is misunderstanding the nature of these experiences and, you know, the most important experiences we have in life. And basically, you know, just paraphrasing what you've said, you know, are not quantifiable or measurable. And, you know, science has got very little to say about them, you know, at all. And a lot of them are actually dismissed. Just what you said about the dreams, it's just a dream. A lot of these experiences are dismissed. You know, the ineffable beauty of a sunset, or that feeling of like falling in love or whatever. the most important things that happen to us that we just struggle to put into words. You know, it's the currency of poets and musicians, isn't it? And artists to try and express something of this.
Yeah. Well, it's like George Steiner, who passed away a year or two ago, one of the last mandarins of high literature and high culture and all that. But he said our dictionaries lag behind our needs, meaning that, you know, we don't have the language to be able to talk about these things. Or we do, but it's in this world, as you say, of poetry and music, all that, which, you know, we give lip service to and recognize as being important. But when then it comes down to it, you know, we tend to accept science as the only arbiter of that. But again, but in the dream, well, that's the whole thing. I mean, the whole thing is like it's only a dream. Well, I mean, in some senses, that's good. I mean, you were happy to wake up from the werewolf dream and know that you weren't a werewolf. I mean, we've all had experiences when we've been in dreams, nightmares, or some crazy situation, and you wake up from it and you think, oh, whoa, you know, I haven't lost all my teeth, or, you know, or whatever it might be. So that's good when that happens, you know. But then at the same time, there are other dreams where you want it to be, you know, it's the opposite, where you're, you know, in the bad dream, you're relieved that it's only a dream in that sense, meaning that it's not part of our everyday reality. But in these other dreams that are more meaningful and deep, the sort of big dreams, Priestley talks about and others, and he's hearkening to Jung, but sort of archetypal sorts of dreams. I mean, wow, those kinds of dreams, as you say, well, you know, I don't care if it's only a dream or not, but those are the ones that have that tremendous impact on us.
Well, I went through a phase, and this was pre-pandemic, just to, by the way, in case anybody's wondering, of having the most appalling apocalyptic dreams about the absolute destruction of everything. Sometimes on the earth, sometimes beyond the earth, and that I'm glad to say that's kind of come to an end. But that's just to sort of presage a thought where I've noticed. I mean, I've noticed this probably, if I'm honest, all my life. But at different phases in life, that the dreams seem to, this is one very important function they seem to perform for me, and I'm sure for lots of other people. They seem to reflect back something of my state of mind in waking consciousness and how I'm conducting myself in life. And I notice that the more I am on a path I feel I'm supposed to be on, the more I'm doing what I know to be the right thing and not doing what I'm not supposed to be doing, then the more dreams seem to take on, you know, sort of a coherence and, you know, a positivity. And if I'm not doing the right thing, whatever that looks like, any type of bad behavior you can imagine, you know, just anything you know, I don't mean that, you know, in terms of like physical stuff, but, you know, but you're deviating. Sure. I know exactly what you mean. You're deviating from your path. I get pushback in the dream world, and I know what it's telling me. It's telling me, don't be doing that. This isn't right. You know what to do. And then you fall back, you step back onto the path again, and the dreams seem to, you know, they come back into coherence as well. It's very interesting.
Well, this is what Jung said, dreams, their function or purpose or their teleology was that they had a compensatory, you know, relationship to our conscious attitudes. And if our conscious attitudes become too one-sided and narrow and too fixed, or to the expense of other perspectives on a particular situation, or, you know, ourselves, or whatever it might be, then the dream comes up with a story, a narrative, a symbol somehow to compensate for that. And I mean, again, this is the thing. It's sadly, we tend to be the worst possible person to interpret our own dreams, because our dreams are what we are not conscious of. We're just not aware. I mean, you know, again, there's different levels. I mean, you know, there's some dreams that are just nervous thoughts, and you're just on the surface of stuff, and it's just you kind of thinking, you know, subconsciously. So, but the dreams that come from the deeper layers, from that other side of ourselves that's part of us, or that we are part of, it's that part of us that we're not conscious of. And so you and I, the conscious Greg and Gary, the verbal, I's, egos that use language, we're not going to necessarily immediately understand all the symbols and all that. And that, sadly, I'm not making a pitch for therapists, but this is why, traditionally there have been, the dream interpreters, whether it's a psychologist or the shaman or, someone else you go to. But someone who sort of knows you, and can see the bits that you don't know about yourself that the dream tells you. And one of the things that I found really fascinating about sort of the history of dreams, or the history of interpretation of dreams, because I have a little potted history in the book about how dreams speak in the symbolic language, but they also tell jokes. They like plays on words and wit. But and obviously humor takes place within a particular kind of culture, a particular language. So even the Egyptians, one of the earliest people to understand that dreams can be interpreted and that they're intelligent and they have a kind of meaning and a message of some sort. But they even said, oh yes, they have these, they tell jokes. But what would be funny to an ancient Egyptian, but wouldn't necessarily raise a laugh with us.
Now, one thing I want to sort of throw out there in a slightly confessional tone, and I'm doing this because I'd be interested to hear from any listeners or yourself if this has any resonance, is that I can't remember where I read it. It might have been Jung, but it was a long time ago. It might just been in one of those dream interpretation manuals that used to get, in the New Age bookshops, was that in dream, a house represents the dreamer's mind. In some symbolic way. And when I've, been not on the path I'm supposed to be on, I've commonly had dreams of very dark, quite disturbing, very messy houses. And I'm in the dream, I move from room to room, and I'm appalled at the state of the house. And sometimes there are commonly food scraps, and there are commonly insects. Now, this is just something that's so vivid and so unpleasant. But this
Greg,
is, yes.
How long have you been having these dreams, Greg? Sorry, that's my therapist's voice. Go ahead. Sorry. I'm just joking.
Yeah, tell me again about your relationship with your mother.
No, I mean, this is the thing. It's, the jokes that dreams tell are not necessarily very subtle. They're very straightforward. They're actually kind of, quite straightforward and sometimes very gross. And likewise, any other messages are just kind of, so yeah, you've taken the wrong path. So, say like Dante, who found himself, in a dark wood, in middle age. He had discovered that he had gone off the path and he found himself in a dark wood. You found yourself in these nasty flats or these places or houses. And I mean, it makes, again, I don't know what was going on in your life at the time. So, and if you remember, you might be able to, now I understand why that was happening. Because one thing that can help us individually interpret our dreams is to give some space, some time to them. So you write them down, but don't try to read them immediately. Just let them go for several months, actually. And then you can read them back as a series. And because you have a bit of distance from what was happening at the time you were having the dreams, you could be able to see, what they're saying and all that. I mean, this is one of the things, but I mean, one of the things I do in the book is I'm not so much interpreting the dreams, which is a whole other thing, is having these strange experiences in them, these kind of temporal displacements, where, something that would happen to me later on that day, in the morning I wake up, or maybe, 2 days later or in the week, or, I mean, a couple of examples I give this, there's quite a bit of time in between, there's a few years. I've had this, I've already experienced it, in the dream. So, that was only a dream. And then, what was only a dream actually turned out to be real. And that's the precognitive aspect of it. And again, one of the points I make in the book is that, we've heard lots of stories about, people having premonitions. And what we usually hear about in terms of dreams of the future are what I call the 2 Ds. There's the disaster dreams or the Derby dreams. So somebody wins at the races, somebody dreams a series of winners, and there's, quite a few accounts of that. Or, sadly, there are dreams presaging some disaster. You said you were having these apocalyptic sorts of dreams. One of the things, because I was writing the book and I was reading and researching it during the first lockdown, and I wondered if people, were having sort of dreams about lockdown or just, disease or something along these lines, prior to it happening. And I tweeted about it a bit, but in the end, I didn't have the space to be able to, add stuff like that. But one of the things that was strange was when I was going through my dream journals, the book goes back to dreams recorded in about 1980. So it's the last 40 years, or I wrote it in 2020. So by now it's 42 years. Is that, a dream from sometime in the 1990s, I think in 1998. In it, someone tells me to stay at home, don't go out. There's no reason to go out. Stay at home where it's safe. And this was smack in the middle of the first lockdown, and that was the message that you heard everywhere around you. All the media surrounding me were telling me to stay at home. And so, strangely enough, I came across a dream from, 20 years earlier or 22 years earlier, giving me that message. At the time I was hearing it. So, I wouldn't necessarily call the dream precognitive, but I would think it's one of those things that Jung would have called the synchronicity.
Yeah, well, you mentioned precognition there and precognitive dreams, and dreams do appear to take place. They appear to be sort of outside of time and space as we think of them. And for me, the one of the reasons they're so important because they actually call into question whether time and space are actually fundamental to reality. And I think that the more attention you pay to the dreamscape, especially when it seems to have some kind of influence or overlap, with waking reality, the more I think that time and space as being fundamental is called into question. And that's also something that I've been exploring, and I know you have as well, from other avenues as well, and even cutting edge science is calling this into question. For example, you talked about, there's I can't remember the story of the parable of, the arrow, going from one point to another, but it never moves.
What's this one of Zeno's paradoxes?
Yeah, and there's then the idea of dividing time up into smaller and smaller portions, and you get to something that's called Planck length, and then this is like a established scientific concept, and that Planck time is the time it would take a photon traveling at the speed of light to cross a distance equal to the Planck length, which in itself is the scale at which classical ideas about gravity and space-time cease to be valid. So science is basically saying at some point what we take to be fundamental breaks down. And in dreams, as the past, present and future appear to be accessible, I think it's not just in the dream space. I think you then get into the realms of parapsychology and other what's down as paranormal and supernatural experiences that some people have in waking reality.
No, absolutely. I mean, Zeno's paradox is, it's the idea that it's basically a logical paradox in the sense that an archer releases a bow, and it's on its way to hit the target. But we can always divide whatever space is between where the arrow is at any point and the target itself. So he releases the bow, at some point it's halfway there. And then, another point it's half of that, another point it's half of that, another point is half of that. And we can continually, divide it. And it never, logically, because of that, it never actually hits the target. And so this was part of this Parmenidean tradition, the early Greek pre-Socratic philosopher Parmenides, who's saying that change is an illusion. And he was kind of the opposite of, later came after him, was Heraclitus, who said, actually, the stability is the illusion. Change is the only truth, and we can never step into the same river twice. I think he even really said we can't even step into it once, but anyway. So, so there's that. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I don't, really look at very much in the book is sort of scientific notions of time. And I have seen some of the talks I've given about it. People have said, oh, what about entropy and the arrow of time and all that? I mean, these are ways that things are measured. But, I mean, entropy works because things change, because there's process. So there's a certain processes taking place in the physical universe where things run down. But that's the measure we have of time, and it moves in a certain direction. So, energy gets dissipated, and there's always more random energy, more kind of junk energy given off than any usable energy. So eventually it'll, the heat death and all that kind of thing will happen. But that, again, we assume that those processes take place within a medium that we call time, but without the processes taking place, we wouldn't have it. If you had a completely stable, physical universe where nothing broke down, razor blades didn't get dull, iron didn't rust, there would be no processes going on, and we wouldn't have an hour of time. So, I mean, it's whether there's this actual kind of stuff called time that. It's how should we say it? The phenomena take place, the experiences take place, whether in our everyday TikTok time, and I don't mean the social media app. I mean the clock ticking away as it used to back in the day before digital clocks, or the temporal anomalies. I mean, those things happen. But one of the things I do talk about in the book is the idea like there might not be the stuff that we call time.
No, I don't think there is. I've done a couple of shows, based entirely on talking about concepts of time. But no, I think it's a matter of perception. Basically, in our waking reality, with 3 dimensions, 5 senses, I think that it's a concept that allows us to organize experience and perception in a sort of a way that fits, as it were. We're trying to say, okay, we know what's happening, the past, the present, the future. That when we can put it across this line from one side of whatever to another. But I think that's why I mentioned time and space not being fundamental. I'm thinking of them as a lot of people think of time and space as some kind of, x-axis or y-axis or some kind of scaffolding on which, the cosmos, the universe, reality is kind of hanging, it's suspended. Well,
I mean, apparently we're getting into philosophy here. I talk about it a bit in the book. This is Kant. We have certain categories through which we actually have experience. So it may not be the case that in the Ding on Zeke, the thing in itself, time and space as we understand it, or things that, it participates in. But for us to have any kind of experience, Kant said, very influential German philosopher from the late 18th century, he said that, we have to, we can't, because I say in the book, we can't conceive of a totally static universe. We can't conceive of anything not happening. There's quite a few things that we can't actually think of them, as we say, the mind boggles at them. And even if, in quantum physics or whatever it might be, they can do the math and say, aha, here, yes, this happens. It's still not something that we can conceptualize. So, the math may say this must be the case, but we can't visualize it in any way. Just like the whole notion of time flowing. This is the Newtonian, equable time, flowing at the same rate in all directions everywhere. So an hour lasts just as long here as it does in whatever galaxy that's 25 light years away from us. But if time flows, okay, so the analogy is with the river, but where are the river's banks? We never get to the banks of the river. Because if you're on the banks of the river to watch it flow, then you must be in a different time itself. And this gets into the whole, precognitive thing again, getting back to J.W. Dunne, or just bringing him into the conversation, who's the fellow who gets the whole precognitive dream thing going. He's the guy who writes this book in the early 20s, Experiment with Time, where he just by chance discovers that bits and pieces of the future turn up in his dreams. And he's not an occultist or a spiritualist. He's a aerodynamics engineer. But he becomes fascinated with this phenomena, this temporal anomaly that's happening to him. And he thinks at first that, it's only happening to him. And he's, he's somebody who's afflicted with this strange malady. But then he discovers through a series of chance events that other people have similar sort of experiences, and then he realizes this is something that's common to all of us. But it must mean that our usual everyday notion of time moving in one direction, constant, that Newtonian flow, can be correct. And so, but he develops a whole, ultimately unsatisfying philosophy, serialism, which postulates different levels of time, different times. It's time 1, time 2, time 3, and so on. So you finally get to the ultimate sort of unobserved observer, some deity of sorts, or universal mind, behind which there's no further time. But what's interesting is that Priestley said we don't need this infinite regress. We can understand precognitive dreams and their importance if we just stick to the first three levels of time.
That concludes part 1 of our interview. Part 2 will be available soon in the subscribers area at legalizefreedom.com.
legalizefreedom.com